Hi, everyone. I'm McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, and I'm sorry we're getting off to a slightly delayed start tonight. The joy of virtual events is the minor technical issues that come along, but we're all here. We're all excited and ready to celebrate Kimi Cunningham Grant's new book that is actually not quite out. It'll be out in a couple weeks, but I'll put a link in the comments as always for more information about her books, Wiley's books, and to order from us if you're so inclined. Before I bring them on, I do want to mention that we've just kicked off a program that we take part in every year. Beloved crime writer Duane Swierczynski lost his daughter Evie a couple years ago, and so they started a book drive in her name. It benefits the Children's Hospital of LA's Literary Healing Program. And you can find more information about that. Also, I'll put a link in the comments, but at teamevyfoundation.com. We take part every year. This year, their goal is, I think, 2,500 books, and we're well on the way to that already. If you do want to order books for the book drive from us, I will put the link in there. We ask that you do only those books on the order and choose in-store pickup because we handle all the delivery to California. Also, if you're not sure which books to choose and you want to order a gift card and have us put books in with the batch to go to California, we're happy to do it that way. For every book that is purchased for the book drive, you're entered into a drawing for a $100 Murder by the Book gift card. And it's always a good thing. And we're always really happy with how many customers participate. And it's a worthy cause. Oh, the last thing is please don't drop off even if they're gently used books, because some of the children are immunocompromised. And so the requirement is that the book drive does need new books. Okay. Since we're getting off to a late start, I should move on. But if you have any questions for either author, don't be shy. Put them in the comments on Facebook or in the live chat on YouTube, and we'll get to them a little bit later. Okay, so let's bring on Kimi. Hi, how are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to host you. It's a pleasure to meet you. And congratulations on an excellent book.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Yeah, you should be. You absolutely should be. Let me do your official bio really quickly, and we'll get Wiley on here. Kimi Cunningham Grant is the author of Fallen Mountains, Silver Like Dust, and These Silent Woods. Kimi is a two-time winner of a Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Memorial Prize in Poetry and a recipient of a Pennsylvania Council on the Arts Fellowship in Creative Nonfiction. Her poems and essays have appeared in Fathom, Literary Mama, Rattle, Poet Lore, and Whitefish Review. She lives, writes, and teaches in Pennsylvania. And as I mentioned, she has a brand new book out called These Silent Woods, which is absolutely fantastic. So congratulations again on that. We are arranging to have signed copies of it when it's available. So that will be, I think the pub date's been pushed back 2 weeks, correct?
November 16th.
There we go. Yes, that sounds right. Okay. We're also joined by Wiley Cash doing an excellent job to show that beautiful cover. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I always joke that my favorite people for these author talks are the guest moderators because they make my life easy. I get to duck away and listen to
I'm here for you. I'm here. You can go drink for the next 40 minutes.
I might, technical issues bring that out for sure. Okay. Let me do your bio as well, and then I'll leave you two to chat. Wiley Cash is the New York Times bestselling author of A Land More Kind Than Home, the acclaimed This Dark Road to Mercy, and most recently, The Last Ballad. That's out of date. Most recently, When Ghosts Come Home. He won the SIBA Book Award and the Conroy Legacy Award and was a finalist for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize and the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best Novel, and has been nominated for many more. A native of North Carolina, he's the Alumni Author-in-Residence at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. He lives in Wilmington, North Carolina with his wife, photographer Mallory Cash, and their two daughters. And again, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Of course, McKenna. Thank you for having me. And
it's
Kimi,
a pleasure.
thank you. Well, thank you.
I am going to go away. I'm going to give you an update on time. If there are any issues, you just call me. I'll be right here.
Yeah, McKenna's going to go check the questions.
That's
check
right.
on Facebook. We know how that goes.
Exactly.
I just want to echo what McKenna said. If y'all have questions, anybody out there watching on Facebook or whatever streaming service we're on, there's so many we lose count. If you have a question during this, just pop it into the chat or put it in the comments on Facebook. It's not going to interrupt us. It's not going to throw us off our game. None of us have any idea what we're doing. The questions aren't going to bother us at all. But that's the best part of this experience, is getting questions from the readers. And this is the book that you can't, unless you have one of these very valuable galleys like I do. And there are a lot of galleys floating around because the buzz around this book has been considerable and it has been long simmering. But many of you are going to have to wait a couple of extra weeks. So perhaps you have a question in the meantime. So please ask it of Kimi, because I know that she'll be excited to answer. But Kimi, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm a big fan.
Oh, well, thank you. And I am now. I really enjoyed this book. And I think that all the praise and all the great reviews and the blurbs, I got some friends, Ron Rash, Jess Montgomery. I've never known them to lie. And they say this book is fantastic. So people at home should certainly believe them. So would you tell us a little bit about the novel in These Silent Woods?
Yeah, These Silent Woods is about a man named Cooper who is living in the remote northern Appalachian woods with his 8-year-old daughter, Finch. And we know that although at first glance it seems like their life there feels pretty idyllic, we discover quickly that it's very tenuous. And so they have to stay in hiding if they want to sustain that life together. And so what happens is every year, his friend Jake is supposed to come and bring supplies. And when he doesn't come one year, it sort of sets off a chain of events that start to threaten everything that Cooper has worked so hard to protect.
And that's what I really love about not only the novel, but your summary right there is, I know you teach, Kimi, and I teach as well. And I always tell my students, I tell them a lot of things like, never call me. No, I'm kidding. I tell them lots of things, but one thing that I always tell them is the best time to start a story is on the day when the routine is broken. Mm-hmm. And that is how your novel begins. That is really when things start, that's when the narrative becomes unsettled. So can you tell us, with that in mind, when that routine is broken, it's bad news, and Cooper knows it's bad news. Can you tell us a little bit about Cooper, and then maybe tell us a little bit about his relationship with Finch and kind of what their dynamic is?
Yeah. Cooper is an ex-Army Ranger. So he's very skilled. He's very proficient. He's very strong. And he also is carrying the weight of PTSD from the time that he spent in battle. And so that's always sort of affecting how he looks at the world. He's always seeing things through this sort of lens of, heightened paranoia, I think, because of what he's experienced. And his daughter, Finch, is vibrant and moral and precocious. She's super bright. She reads and she goes into the woods and sets traps. She's very independent, or wants to be. And so the two of them, Cooper will do anything to keep Finch safe in this book. But at the same time, Finch she's 8 and she's starting to push back a little bit at the rules that Cooper has for her.
Yeah, because she's precocious, and also at the same time, she's kind of lonely. So can you tell us, without giving anything away, how that kind of lands the next act of the novel to get it going?
Yeah. Well, Finch is, she is kind of lonely, and she tends to attach to whomever comes into her periphery because she's very trusting, as most kids are, and so she really bonds with their one neighbor who sometimes shows up, Scotland, and then when someone else enters the scene, she immediately wants to befriend her as well. And then later on in the book, when we find that a stranger has wandered on, Finch is immediately enamored as well. So she is lonely, and she's looking for connection with people.
And I think it's so interesting writing with kids in mind, and you render Finch and her world so beautifully. And I want to talk about the quality of the writing and your background in various genres. But can you talk about writing about children, especially a child like Finch? What kind of opportunities it gives you as a writer, whether like their interaction with the natural world, or their interaction with strangers or new people, or the divide between father and daughter and that inherent tension. What was it like writing about a child in this novel?
Yeah. Well, I don't think I realized this until pretty recently, but when I started this book, my oldest son was 8, and now that it's coming into the world, my younger son is 8. And so I'm sure that was shaping, how I was writing this, because kids are homeschooled, so I spend a lot of time with them. We live in the woods, so I spend a lot of time with them outside in the woods, and I'm always sort of interacting with them alongside of them as they interact with the world, the outside world. And so they're always picking up feathers and rocks and keeping things and acorns and all of these things, shells, and they all go through my laundry. I find them in my dryer. But I'm sure that, my own experience of being a parent of kids around this age has shaped the way that I wrote the book.
Sure. I've got 2 little girls. They're 7 and 5. And I'll be like, why is there a pile of sticks in your room? And they'll be like, oh, you didn't touch them, did you? I'm like, no, I didn't disturb your little nature altar, but let's keep the sticks outside if we can, because Dad's stepping on them barefoot. And that's not fun for me. But I always think about kids, and especially with Finch in this novel, or, the world is new every day to them. And they approach the world with such wonder and awe, and they want to engage with it. And it sets up this wonderful tension with Cooper, because he is very much not that way. Can you talk about the tension between the two of them, in terms of how he views the world with suspicion and kind of
And I realized I didn't fully answer your previous question, which was about how she also interacts with other people. And again, I think, we want our kids to be open to people, or at least I want my kids to be open to people and to assume the best in them. And then at the same time, there are times when I'm like, you don't know those people. Why are you showing them where we live? And why are you telling them the things? And so kids, I think, don't have the natural suspicion, I guess, that even people who are not carrying the kind of weight that Cooper is, they just tend to sort of, see someone and strike up a conversation. And so in the case of Cooper and Finch is probably pretty typical or pretty average as far as her desire to interact with the outside world, and Cooper is the one who so desperately needs to keep his past hidden and keep their existence hidden, that it just leads to a lot of tension between the two of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cooper has had all of these experiences that have shaped him into being the person that he is. And you mentioned his PTSD early on in the conversation. What inspired you to write about that, to write about veterans, to write about PTSD, to write about somebody trying to navigate the world with a young child?
Yeah. Well, a number of years ago, I wrote a short story about a man who took his infant daughter, and he felt that the mother was unsafe. That's not the situation in this book, but he felt that the child was unsafe with her mother, and he went off and delivered the baby to a trusted friend, and then disappeared into the woods. I submitted that story widely, and it got rejected by 50 literary magazines or something ridiculous.
Been there. You are seen.
Yeah, right. It happens, but there were lots of personal notes. One was handwritten, and I was like, okay, there's something here. And so I didn't want to give it up just yet. And then in the meantime, I also had this, I think all along I knew I've been watching the news and seeing, even locally here in Pennsylvania, people who had returned from Afghanistan and who were really struggling to adapt, and who had committed acts of violence, and who I realized, I think, pretty early on, when I returned to that short story and wanted to open it wide open and figure out where what if his situation were different? What if he stayed with the child? And as I was doing that, as I re-entered that with a blank page, I I thought, I think that this character is carrying weight from a war. I think that's kind of where I got to that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm wondering, and I don't have an answer for this necessarily, but when I was thinking about your book, I was thinking about other novels of suspense or novels that have suspenseful arcs. Why do you think family dynamics work so well as a backdrop in suspense novels?
I think family is almost always messy.
Yeah.
Even really great families have some tensions, and maybe they ignore them or they bury them or, overlook them. But families are almost always rife with tension. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it does make a good starting place for stories. As I think about different books that are about that are suspense novels, a lot of them have family secrets, family tensions, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm teaching a novel right now called Shelter that came out. I want to say it might have come out in 2014 by a writer named Jung Yoon, and it's a suspense novel. It's a novel of family and heartache and bad decisions and all of those things. And family's always there. It's always coming for you in one way or
Yeah.
another, and it's always kind of looming. Even if it's not present, it's psychologically present, and it just makes for such a rich, fertile ground, that tension. And we all know it. We all have those triggers, or and these patterns of family experiences that makes it such delicious, starting points for novels. So you've done a lot of things in the literary world, and you've had a lot of success in various genres. And when I was looking through the reviews, both the trade reviews and also the Goodreads and all of the locker room of American literature where the readers go to gossip about us, people kept talking about the quality of the writing and how beautiful the writing is. And sure, this is a suspenseful novel. Sure, you want to read it quickly, and sure, you want to see what happens. But the writing itself is really, really beautiful. So you've got this background as a poet. So can you talk a little bit about your approach to language and how you balance language with tension or plot or propulsion?
Well, before I do, I am going to say that, Wiley, when I read your work, I feel the same way, that your sentences sing, and they're so beautiful as well. I think, generally as a writer, I would say that my struggle is more to maintain tension and to build good plot. And I'm very grateful that I have friends who are readers who can help me with that. My agent, Amy Clogley, is wonderful and will always kind of say, okay, things are lagging, let's tighten this up, or something needs to happen here. And she always kind of steers me on course. And my editor, Sarah Grill, is the same way. She has been such a help to me. And so I think it's somewhat unintentional, I guess, as far as that poetry influence on my language. But I do tend to read aloud a lot, and I want sentences to feel and sound good when they're read aloud. And so reading I do end up printing copies, and I don't know if you do that, but I print out a hard copy. I read it, a lot of it out loud, just to hear how it sounds.
I am way more old-timey than that. I handwrite with a pencil and notebook paper. So then I have to type it, and that is a nightmare because I can type quickly, but then when I'm looking at my own work and trying to edit it while I'm looking at it and then put it on the screen, it's just a total nightmare. But I'm even more dated than that. When we were having the tech trouble at the start of the show, McKenna said maybe she can get on with her phone, and I was thinking, I hope so, because I have a flip phone, and I was thinking if my laptop doesn't work, we're not doing this event. So luckily, you were able to get on. So you talked about, and I think it's so interesting what you said about your editor and your friends who are readers who can sense those moments where the novel might need to lean toward a little more plot, right, and a little bit away from character development. What is that process like? Because I know for me, and we're doing another event tomorrow night. We can talk about this more, but when I was writing my book that just came out, there was a point where my editor said, hey, these are all really interesting characters. I'm enjoying reading about them. what happens in the book? And I was like,
Mhm.
I don't know. I thought that was enough. I have
Yeah.
no idea what's going to happen, because I'm not a great plot writer either. And I
Okay.
feel like I kind of stumble my way, especially in my last book, through plot. How do you go about it? You have these rich characters. How do you start? Do you start with Cooper? Do you start when I know you wrote it as the short story, but how do you bring those kind of ticking elements of plot and tightening tension to the page?
Well, I tend to be like you. I start writing. I'll start sometimes with a character. In this case, I did have an image in my head. I won't share the image. It does appear in the book sort of later on, but I knew that maybe Cooper would see something that he ought to tell about, and that if he did, he would risk everything. And so that was sort of one of the things that I knew I wanted to get to at the end. But I do tend to kind of write. I'll start with a character or an image, and I start filling things in, and I think about it a lot and get ideas in my head. And I'm an obsessive reviser. I have 2 documents always, and one's brutally named my cut document. But so I cut and copy and paste a lot into that document, and sometimes I bring it back, and sometimes, this just happened a couple of weeks ago, my agent said, you never followed through with that thing. And I said, yeah, she brings it back. And she's like, no, that's not in there. And so I know it's in the cut document. I know I wrote it, but it's just like not in the actual document.
Oh, well,
So it's messy. I think I tend to, figure out plot points. And then eventually things get messy enough that I have to sort of sketch out an outline on a piece of paper and say, okay, so this happens here, and then I want to have something happen later. So that means I have to shuffle this chapter backwards, and space them out or something. So I think that's sort of how I figure out pacing. It's very messy and it takes a long time.
I love 2 things. I did an event with Jason Mott, who's a writer who lives here in North Carolina. He had a new novel come out called Hell of a Book. And I hosted him in one of my classes that I'm teaching this semester. And he says he keeps a huge file that he has his main document, which is his novel, his work in progress. Then he keeps kind of this messy file of like overheard bits of conversation, things he saw on TV, images that he knows he wants to go in. And while he's working on his novel over a year, 2 years, or 3 years, sometimes he'll just open that big document and say like, oh, I remember that line of dialogue. I'm going to put that in this scene. And he just has like this bag of excitement that he can open up. And he's like, oh, there you are. I forgot about you. This will be a nice little thing to put in. But to the story you just told about your editor saying, or your agent saying, what about this that never comes back? And you're like, yeah, it does. Because you had written it. So it exists, but you don't know that it doesn't exist for everybody because it's not in. And I did a class years and years ago. I was visiting a class and talking about one of my novels, and a student asked me what my favorite scene was. So I went into this long description of my favorite scene in the book, and I was talking for like 5 minutes before the student kind of sheepishly like raised her hand and said, "That's not in the book," and it wasn't. And I thought, and you may be like me when I was, not in the business, as they say, and you would go to a literary reading, and the writer would say, let's see, where's that scene I want to read? And I'm like, come on, get over it. Like, you can't remember your own book. I write a book and I'm like, I have no memory of what's in this. No clue. Like, or where things are, like like you said, you got to make an outline because you create literally like you're creating this messy world and then you're trying to bring order to it at some point.
Yeah.
Is that what the outline does for you at that point where you're trying to herd all these cats?
Yeah, I think it's just like that. I realize, okay, I can't have this happen yet because, this character doesn't know this or doesn't do this yet. So I have to bump it later into the book. And so the outline and that hard copy sort of helps me to get a gauge on it. I don't know where I sort of peter out and I just can't keep track of it, what the page number is, but at some point I always end up having to sketch it out, like what actually is happening when, because I kind of lose track of it, as you were saying. And I'm actually really relieved to hear you say that you did that in that class, because I've always felt like, how do I forget that it's like, how did I not remember to put that scene back into the actual hard copy. Like I printed it out and read it, and somehow in my head I just still thought it was there, but it's not. I've looked over, it really isn't there. My agent was like, it's not there, I think I would remember. And she's right.
Well, I want to say, and maybe I'm giving us too much benefit of the doubt, but I want to say it's because we spend so much time with this stuff, and whether or not it's on the page or the screen, it still feels real to us. It feels like life. And I don't remember parts of my life. I actually heard a story on NPR. I think it was on Friday, about the value of the brain being able to forget things, not in a neurological way that shows, any kind of, retrograde action in the brain or anything like that, but the healthy way of forgetting. Like I can't hold the entirety of my life in my brain.
Right.
And that's how life should feel. And if you want our novels to feel like life, then we're going to forget some of it. Right. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you that the writing that I remember slashing every T and dotting every I, if I can remember it, that means it's not good, because I labored over it and I struggled with it. And that's the writing that I like the least, the stuff that I can really remember being at the desk and creating. It kind of means I was maybe out of the flow of the experience of the work. I don't know.
Yeah. Or it's you got to kill those darlings kind of thing. Yeah. Sure. That's interesting.
Yeah. So this novel is, and I'm looking at the book, there's not something scurrying underfoot, I promise. This novel is set in the natural world, and you write about nature so beautifully. Can you talk about how nature inspires you as a writer, but then also how it informs your writing in this novel?
Mm-hmm. I love being outside. I rarely have a day that I'm not outside some. I mentioned before that we live in the woods, so I walk in the woods, and I do kind of write, not verbatim, but I write scenes or think about scenes or think about things that I want to incorporate as I walk. So it is sort of a therapeutic type of meditative experience for me to be out in the natural world and breathing in the smells of the woods and touching the rocks and feeling the lichen and the tree bark and all of that. So that is always informing. It's just a really big part of my life. And I think, especially when I was writing this book, a lot of times I would, just be kind of spinning my wheels a little bit. And sometimes a walk would clear things up for me.
Mm-hmm. Are there any scenes that come to mind in the book that you can give readers kind of the extras on the DVD right now? Any scenes where you can say, this scene or this scent or this instance of a character doing something is something that I experienced in the woods, or something I see on a daily basis, or some way in which my life found a home on the page in the novel?
Yeah, there's a scene. This location appears a couple of times in the novel, and it's when Cooper and Finch are heading down to the river to where they have a tree stand for hunting, and there's a rock outcropping there, and so near my house, we were hiking, and I saw this place, and I saw the huge rocks, and I was like, I need to add this into this is a place in the book. I just knew, and then I wrote it. I think I sent my editor a picture of it. I was like, this is where I pictured this happening. So. Oh,
that's so cool. When the book becomes a huge hit, you can charge admission fees to your land and be like, come walk the landscape of my novel.
That's a good idea.
So my writing traditionally, at least in my career, has been associated with Southern Appalachia, and you're writing about Northern Appalachia. Can you tell us a little bit about this region, and the things about it that you thought were really important to try to render on the page?
Yeah. Well, in this book and in my last book, they both take place sort of in a similar area where, I love Pennsylvania because we have farm fields and we have rolling hills, and then we have mountains. Now, they're not huge mountains, but they're steep and rugged. And there are places in the Pennsylvania woods. I was sort of, Cooper wouldn't actually be so foolish as to share where he actually is. But in my head, I was picturing him sort of being up in the near the Allegheny National Forest. So that's north of where I am. And it's just so remote. And, there are just scattered tiny little towns, but it largely is just very stark and remote and beautiful. So yeah, that region to me always feels very beautiful but stark. With my last novel, Fallen Mountains, when I was writing that book, I went up and spent a day doing field work with my husband, who's an ecologist, and he was studying the effects of fracking on aquatic ecosystems up there at the time. And so I went up for a day, and there were places in the Allegheny National Forest that had been totally transformed from fracking. And so the roads were widened and flattened, and there were all these well pads and stuff. So, I think that place, I don't live in that area, but it really, has made an impact on me.
Sure. Yeah. We used to live in the panhandle of West Virginia. So fracking and the way the landscape changes. And one day you just kind of look around and all of these things that weren't there the day before are suddenly there. Different industries, different businesses, different types of vehicles. I mean, it is an altered landscape overnight. Yeah. And then of course the fracking pads themselves kind of look like moonscapes. I mean, they look like other planets.
Yep. And they're huge.
Yeah, they're enormous. And it's it's interesting. If you haven't seen fracking and you have opinions on fracking, go see fracking. Go see what that's like. That's what I will say to our listeners. If anybody's got any questions, please type them in to the chat or share your comments on Facebook. We'll bring McKenna back in here. I'll get her off the bottle and bring her back in here in just a moment. But before we do, as she's screwing the lid back on her Jamesons, can you talk about your influences? Maybe your lines of descent, and you can say, I was influenced by that, and this shows up in my book. And if readers like this author, maybe they'll like my book.
I'm just reading Peter Heller's new book, The Guide, which I love so far. I love the way he writes, and he captures the natural world so poetically and so beautifully always. And I love Anthony Doerr's work. One of my favorite books is Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11. So, I read sort of across genres. I don't strictly read any one genre. Celeste Ng is just the master of tension building and writing from that omniscient point of view. So I have so many people I admire. I loved Where the Crawdads Sing too. And I love Hannah Tinty as well.
Well, it's so funny because I can see all those influences showing up in this book almost verbatim. You can, and you and Peter Heller, there's a lot of similarities between his work and yours, like the Dog Stars. I mean, there's a lot of similarities there between your two works. So our viewers, if these are writers that appeal to you, you can almost be guaranteed that Kimi's book that'll be out in a couple of weeks will appear to you as well. So maybe we'll bring McKenna back in if there are any questions.
We have some questions. Yes,
right.
We do have questions. So first off, hopefully Wiley and I haven't messed this up, but we have a question here. Is it pronounced Kimi or Kimi?
Oh my goodness.
You can say the real answer.
It's Kimi.
It's Kimi? Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
I know. Well, if I had been crawling through a giant blanket fort to get my son's computer right as this interview started, then I could have clarified that. But instead, I showed up out of breath and, freshly emerged from the fort. So,
I'm so sorry.
No worries.
I did it too, Wiley. As soon as I said Kimi, that question popped up, and I was like, I feel like this is a loaded question.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I don't know where I was. I don't know if I was at a cafe getting a coffee yesterday or today, and they were like, Willie, your drinks here, Willie, and I'm like, I'm Willie. So, shame on me.
All right. Well, I will try to get it right for the rest of the event at least. All right. So one of our employees, Rebecca, actually is a huge fan of this book, and she has a couple questions. One of them is, where did the idea for These Silent Woods and Cooper and Finch's situation come from? I know you've already touched base on this, but maybe if you could summarize?
Yeah, I really think that I had this short story that had sort of, it wasn't working. And when I started rethinking what might have happened if I had a man with, a past that he was trying to escape, and an infant daughter, and I put them into this remote cabin, like what might happen to them and what would they need to do to survive. I'm really interested in survivalist narratives. I love, I watch shows sometimes about these people who truly do live off grid and don't get an annual supply run. And I'm always so amazed that people are able to do that. And so I loved just sort of exploring, what that could look like for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I forgot to do what I always do when I come back on for questions, which is to give our guest moderator just a quick chance to talk about their latest book, because this does take time and energy to come on and be so prepared and do such a great interview. So Wiley, would you actually take a couple minutes to tell us about When Ghosts Come Home?
My latest book is These Silent Woods. I wrote it under the pseudonym Kimi Cunningham Grant. But it is a wonderful book, and I hope everybody picks it up. So thank you for asking about my book, McKenna. My new novel is called When Ghosts Come Home. It came out in September 21st. And it opens when a middle-aged sheriff in the fall of 1984 is awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of a low-flying aircraft passing over his house in the middle of the night. He knows there is no good reason on this little island off the coast of North Carolina for an aircraft of that size to be coming in this late. And so he goes out to this tiny municipal airport just on the mainland off the island. And what he discovers changes his life. It changes the life of this little sleepy community. And so this is a novel. It's set in 1984. It's a novel about race and memory and fathers and daughters and insiders and outsiders and all of those things. So.
Excellent. And as Kimi already said, your writing is so beautiful that anyone who wants just a beautifully written crime novel should not miss.
Well, thank you.
I'll jump in and say it really is such a good book. I loved Winston and I loved Marie, and it was a page turner. There were moments where I was completely petrified, but also just really beautiful, tender moments between a father and daughter, and so I highly recommend.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for saying that.
So a question for both of you. We can start with Kimi. What are you working on next? And then Rebecca was also wondering if you could recommend one book you've read this year, what would it be? Now, I already know Kimi, just Peter Heller, Station 11, all sorts of wonderful things, but maybe a recent release.
Okay. Do you want to go first, Wiley?
So I'm working on a novel right now. It's again set on the coast of North Carolina, and it is set in the fall of 2018, in the days following the toppling of the Silent Sam Monument, the Confederate monument on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill. And if I could recommend something that I've been reading recently, gosh, I've been on a really good reading roll lately. But one book I've really enjoyed, it's propping up my computer right here, is my friend Jason Mott's book. This is so not professional. Hell of a book. He lives down the road from me here in North Carolina. It's a National Book Award finalist. We're very excited about that. But this is a great book. It's about an author on book tour who's kind of going out of his mind, but it's about hauntings of racial violence and the uncertain moment in which we found ourselves here in the past couple of years.
Excellent. All right, Kimi, what are you working on?
I'm working on a new book that takes place in two timelines, in 1941 in Peru and 1997 in Pennsylvania. And so it's sort of a story about someone who's exploring his something that he did in the past and figuring out whether he can reconcile with the person that he did it to.
Mm.
Excellent. And is your pick the Peter Heller? That's what you said you've been reading most recently?
I'll go with the Peter Heller. Yep. It's the book that I'm like, I should be launching a book, but this book is so good. And I keep turning to it and reading it. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. We're all big fans of him and his outdoor writing and all of that. So excellent picks. I think the last question we have from the audience is from Susan. She loves to ask this question. I love this question. What 3 writers, living or dead, would you most like to read? I think she means, would you most like to meet? But Susan, if you're watching, maybe you could clarify.
Or does she mean eat?
She might, but a lot of times this question has to do with hosting dinner parties. So I'm uncertain here where we're going with this.
Well,
Because
I can say I'll take this one. I would like to meet. You know, I get intimidated by really, really smart people. So it's like I love being around smart people, but I don't necessarily want to engage with them. I kind of want to watch them from afar and study them like you would, like, you know. But I also like really, really entertaining people. And so I think if I had to pick 3 writers, I would choose Thomas Wolfe, who's a North Carolina writer who passed away in 1938. He was very rambunctious, kind of over the top. I think he'd be somebody I probably wouldn't want to spend a ton of time with, but I wouldn't mind having met him. My mentor, Ernest Gaines from Louisiana, passed away a couple of years. I miss him and think of him a lot. I wouldn't mind having one last dinner with him in Southwest Louisiana. And then I'm intimidated to say this because I don't know her, but I would love to meet Toni Morrison, to have met Toni Morrison. I would be scared to death to speak in front of her. But her novel Song of Solomon was such an influential book on me as a young writer and a young man. And I would just love to, I don't know, talk to her about that, I guess.
Wonderful. How about you, Kimi?
Well, I was sort of trying to look at my bookshelf over my shoulder to see what I could come up with. I'll go, since I've talked about other writers that I really admire, I'll go with Graham Greene tonight.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
You're supposed to have 2 more.
I know.
Leave it at 1. We can throw Peter Heller in there again.
Sure. I will say Peter Heller and Delia Owens. I'll name them.
Oh, great. Excellent. Okay. Well, I think we've done it. We've answered all the questions. Your conversation was excellent. We made it through tech issues. I'd say all in all, it's been a successful evening. As always, there's a link in the comments for more information about either author or their books. If you're so inclined, we would, of course, appreciate you ordering them from us. We will have signed copies of Kimi's book when it is out in a couple weeks. Wiley, thank you so much for being such a great interviewer. It was a delightful conversation. I really appreciate it.
All right. You're welcome. Thank you for having me, McKenna. Thank you for joining me, Kimi.
Thank you, Wiley, for all the great questions. And McKenna, thanks for hosting. It was such a blast. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Congratulations on a wonderful book. I'm going to say thanks to everyone watching and thanks to the both of you. And we will go ahead and sign off for the evening. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.